Welcome back to Following Noadon, a Stormlight podcast. This week is episode 158, and we're talking about chapters 29 through 32 of Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. We split part 4 right down the middle of the episode, so we've got 2 chapters in part 3 and 2 chapters in part 4. Paul, how are you?
I'm doing great. This is a super exciting week to talk about, so I'm looking forward to getting started.
Elliot?
I'm doing great. This was another week though where I was having trouble not reading onward
Mm,
after having finished my reading and then having to wait for us to do this recording right now before I can read further was challenging.
a little cheeky because we're going to disclose that we all three of us have read through chapter 37 for recording of next week before we recorded this week. So there are a couple glaring questions if you've only read to chapter 32 that we probably won't spend a super long time on because we know the answer to it and we're not going to pretend that we don't. So if you're reading along with us, I would recommend that you read to chapter 37, which is the end of next week's episode. We're not going to explicitly talk about anything in next week's episode, but we're also not going to spend a bunch of time on stuff that we already know the answer to from next episode, if that all makes sense. With that in mind, let's roll intro and talk about Yumi and the Nightmare Painter. This book is getting crazy, gentlemen. This is not where I thought this book was going. Last week we stopped with Nakaro's nightmare creeping out of the alley, rushing them, and then right off the bat we get chapter 29, which is like this huge action sequence, and then we get some more world implications through 30 and 32. What do you guys think of this book up until this point, the end of part 3 here?
I'm looking back at myself of last week and just laughing at myself because last week we were all stuck on the cliffhanger that we were left on, right? Of the nightmare charging them, what's going to happen. That's like 8th on my list of things I feel
Yeah.
like we need to talk about right now. So much more happens in these follow-on chapters. It's like, oh my goodness. I still don't know that I've processed it yet. I'm excited to talk about it with you guys because I don't know what I think about it. So I need to explore it with you guys to even figure out what I think about the events of these chapters.
I almost feel similarly. We saw a lot of crazy stuff, but I'm like, it's kind of funny. Like I have thoughts on the different events that happen, but I'm most excited to come and hear what y'all got from it because I know it will probably be different from what I was thinking, and then it just gets really fun from there.
When I was listening to chapter 29 for my second time, the first time I was kind of just like deer in the headlights trying to take in this chapter because we didn't jump back over to Yumi's planet as I thought we might. We continued with the scene all the way until the end of part 4. We were still on Nakaro's planet. And we get this chapter from Yumi's perspective, chapter 29. And she's running from this nightmare. The whole scene probably, or the whole chapter probably takes place over 15 minutes. It's this really fast paced, action sequence, like Mistborn throwing knives at each other type action sequence. Have we seen a scene like this in this book yet? Is this our first actual Brandon Sanderson verbs telling you what's happening scene?
I think so. I think this is the first, at least major one, at least like action movie scene.
Right.
Um, it's definitely got to be the first one that we've seen because I mean the only other time that might be similar is I think it was chapter 7 or the end of part 1 where where Painter sees the nightmare going for the kid, but even still I wouldn't count that as the same as this. It's really fun. I love how Brandon Sanderson writes these scenes. It's the fun part of Mistborn. Honestly, I'm looking forward to going back to Mistborn and you know, just that kind of style is really fun to read, really engaging. So yeah, I thought it was really cool, and it's definitely a change of pace from what we have been seeing in this book.
I think we got a little bit of an adrenaline rush when Painter and Yumi were sneaking into the tent with the scholars and the machine, but not nearly on this level of 12-foot wolf-like monster is chasing you down back alleys and stabbing people in the chest and throwing playgrounds across the neighborhood. Like, yeah, it ratcheted up to 11 pretty quick there.
Yeah, so let's talk about the mechanics of this nightmare. So Nightmare finally attacks, and Hoyd actually tells us. Hoyd tells the listener that the nightmare was biding its time, waiting for an opportunity to attack Yumi, not Nikaro, as I guessed last week. I thought that this nightmare was personal for Nikaro. Apparently, it's after Yumi. Whether that's personal or not, maybe up for debate. I don't know. Um, but it stabs Yumi through the chest with its claws, like it grabs her and starts squeezing her, and it starts draining the investiture from her, is what Hoyd tells us. And that immediately made me. I mean, I've drawn this parallel before between Nightblood and the nightmares, but that the fact that Hoyd says the nightmare was feasting upon Yumi's essence or in Yumi's investiture, that immediately made me think, okay, this is the same mechanic as Nightblood. And as we do we know, is Nightblood anti-investiture? Have we ever gotten that definition, or have we just postulated that after Rhythm of War?
Somebody, some of our listeners will have to weigh in because I'm sure they remember some of the details better than us. I've been trying to think about the same thing. Is because this has come up a couple times now. Are we dealing with anti-investiture or is it all still investiture? Does that differentiation even matter? I'm asking the same questions as you. I don't have the answers.
So I think what you initially were saying is what we thought, Trevor. So I think before Rhythm of War, was like, is we had a couple questions. We had, was Nightblood otherworldly, just totally its own unique thing, or is it like of what we now know as Void Light? Is it just Dark Stormlight, or is it like anti investiture? There are a lot of questions, right? And I think what we kind of got by the end of Rhythm of War was that it is anti-investiture, or that Nightblood was anti-investiture. So that's fair. I didn't actually think about that whenever we were listening. When I was listening to these chapters, I didn't catch that it's like consuming
Yeah.
investiture. I feel like there are other more quote like, I'm not sure what to make of it, because in my head there are other quote normal fabrials that like consume investiture, like use investiture to be powered.
Mhm.
I'm thinking that this is still different from how Nightblood functions, but no, I don't know how. That's my thought. My understanding is that it's still different, but similar mechanics.
That's where my brain was going to if I'm thinking along the same lines as you. I have to go back and read this for a third time. I didn't take it as the nightmare is consuming necessarily the investiture, simply extracting it from Yumi into itself, which, like you said, Paul, we've seen Fabrials that can do exactly that. That can, hey, I'm going to stab you with this and suck out all your investiture. That's what I felt was happening here. Whereas with Nightblood, Nightblood seems different. Nightblood is like, I'm destroying or consuming, or uh, it seems different. I'm not sure which category the nightmare falls in.
Destroy is the key word with Nightblood. Is that
Right.
very specifically the investiture is being destroyed as opposed to being transferred. So
Right.
yeah, I'm not sure which is happening with the nightmare, which I think is fairly important. Um, this is kind of jumping forward a little bit, but in chapter 32, Design has a conversation with Yumi about her spirit web, and Design is like remarking like, "Oh, you're like made of pure investiture. You're glowing like a bonfire, girl." And that makes me think, well, and then she also makes the observation that the nightmares should be afraid of her. And Yumi and Nikaro are like, well, it's the opposite. They're coming after her. So, yeah, it's really interesting to me the what we're being told and what we're not being told yet about investiture and how it reacts on this world. Um,
Yeah.
I hope we get a clearer answer by the end of the book, although I'm not confident we will. Anyway,
I've I've got another thought or question for you guys about this nightmare. It kind of relates to the later chapters for next episode, though. So I don't know if I should get into it now or save it.
let's save it. We can
Okay.
talk. We can circle back to
Re-
this next episode.
remind me to share my theory about the nightmare with you. That way I don't forget.
Okay. In risk of skipping over it accidentally, we get quite the redemption scene here for Nikaro. Nikaro pulls out his paintbrush, Spirit Nikaro pulls out his paintbrush and paints away this nightmare to save Yumi's life. And it's, I mean, especially on first read, that on second read you've got a bunch of different things in your head, but on first read, this is quite the chapter. I really liked this chapter. I could definitely vividly see it in my head of this torn up playground. Nikaro comes and fends off this nightmare, and we still haven't killed the nightmare. It's very deliberately pushed off and not defeated, I think is the way it's phrased.
This for me is going to be one of those classic Brandon Sanderson hero moments that I think, forever associate with this character of Painter, where throughout so much of this book, he has been maligned and put down and called out for his failings in there's been positive moments too, but so much of this has been about the faults of Painter. And here's this moment where this absolutely horrifying nightmare has laid waste to two painters, his friends, Akane and Tojin, almost sucked all the life out of Yumi. And who steps in to save the day? It's Nikaro in spirit form, facing down this nightmare as his like soul is getting sucked out of him into this nightmare, as he's literally disintegrating as a person. He summons his spirit paintbrush and on the ground paints. He starts with bamboo, but then he goes into something else. And I don't think they even tell us what he's painting, just that it's a masterpiece.
Yeah.
And it's the battle of the painters. He's doing battle with this terrible nightmare with his paintbrush on the ground. Oh man, I can imagine this in my mind so clearly of him just like dancing around and trying to avoid this creepy, murky nightmare thing as he's doing these huge flourishes and painting this massive 12-foot painting on the ground. Like epic hero moment. Oh no, they do tell us what
Uh,
he's painting.
Do they?
They do because he paints a dog because
Oh yeah.
he is he is he's finally realized he's finally looking at what the nightmare looks like, which is they describe it as a lupine figure, like a wolf-like form, and he paints like a puppy. He paints like a masterpiece of like a cute little puppy, and that's enough to start affecting and changing the nightmare, and so it runs away.
you're right. I had kind of forgotten about that. So I want to add also, Elliot. I think this was a one of a kind scene. What I mean by that is not like this could not be replicated, but first off, just face value. I think it's super cool, the description and like the image I had in my mind of they're being chased by this nightmare and basically his, I don't know, superpower for lack of a better term is pulling out this like mystical paintbrush, like an investiture paintbrush and painting, but like it was almost reminiscent of it was painting, but it had the same style to it as the what is it called? The kind of like ritual spear routine that Kaladin does,
Kata.
with a kata. Yeah, not quite the same, but like v- very stylish, I guess. And I was thinking about it. This may not make that much sense, but I was thinking about this as I was reading it. I don't think this would hit the same. Like I don't think this would be as cool of a scene or as impactful if we had already seen this before. If we had seen like, oh, that's just like how the Dream Watchers fight these big nightmares is they pull out their spirit paintbrush and paint something really big and stuff. This it almost felt like a big reveal as to how this can be done on this world, and it was like a mic drop moment.
Yeah.
And I don't think you could have multiple of those in the same story and it carry the same weight. With at least how it is, just how that works. And I just thought that was really cool of how, like we know how painters normally deal with these nightmares, like literally like with a physical ink and paper drawing, But this was like a whole other level, and it just made it somehow. I'm horrible at drawing and anything artistic. Like I have respect for people who can, but it's just something in life I don't understand. But it was so cool. Like this scene I thought was awesome, and I just had so much respect for it. And yeah, all that to say, I loved how it was dropped when it was, and that this, I guess, fight style or whatever you want to call it, um, hasn't been used too much. Like Brandon capitalized on this moment and kind of cashed that out, and I don't think it could be repeated in the story for the same value.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's safe to say that Nicaro would be a light weaver. He's got some demons in his past that he doesn't like confronting, and he's quite the artist. Does a very good job of um, displaying visually. So I just keep thinking, could that? And the reason why I think about this is, could Shalon sketch a nightmare into and be a nightmare painter in that way? And I would probably say yes. That'd be my guess.
It might depend on what planet she's on.
Hmm. Hmm. End of part 4. we get chapter 30. It's a very short chapter. All the painters rush back to the noodle shop um where design is, and they turn on the TV. They show up to or the, they turn on the TV and they are live broadcasting the spaceship reaching the star. And they touch down. There's like these like 4-armed alien creature things that kind of just come check out the ship, and that's the end of part 4. So what?
This was really weird to me.
It's weird to me too.
This was I understand. So my understanding of the purpose of this is to show that it's not Yumi's people, right?
Right.
That it's not Yumi's people on the spaceship. But it was weird. It was just really weird. I actually kind of laughed. I thought it was funny.
I thought it was weird as I kept reading because it felt like a strange way to say, "Oh, look, there's aliens on this planet and oceans, therefore it can't be Yumi's planet. They're not. It's not Yumi's planet." When I read that, I was like, "Oh, okay, that I'm not 100% sold there." But then what I'm asked to buy as the real reason where she's from in the next series of chapters is like, wait, that's even harder for me to swallow than the fact that because there's aliens on this other planet, therefore Yumi can't be from there. Was like, oh my goodness.
Part 4, the first words of part 4, how 31 opens, is a dialogue from Yumi that says, "Maybe it's time travel." And I laughed when I heard that because of Brandon Sanderson's Q&A for this book that we talked about in episode 2 of this book, where he again spells out that time travel to the past is not a thing in the Cosmere. We are not going to be time traveling to the past ever in the Cosmere. And then you get to this chapter, or is it? I think it's 32, where design says it's not time travel. Like you're not time traveling. Trust me. So I think thought that was pretty funny that Sanderson just put that straight in there to dissuade people from going down that path. So, and I could see where you would go with that without the knowledge that we have. Like, if you just picked up this book, then you might start thinking, oh, maybe it is time travel. So I understand why you put that right at the beginning of chapter 31, because maybe that is the next spot that you go to in your brain, and then he's just going to immediately dispel it. So
I do think it was necessary to have that very explicitly in there. It did feel like a voice of Brandon Sanderson saying, "Stop asking me about time travel. It's not possible." Like,
yes,
let me put that in the text. It's not possible.
And I have to say, I'm really glad it's not possible, because if it was, like, we already have too much to wrap our heads around. Imagine adding time travel to the equation. That would
no.
it would literally go from a lot, like too much to handle, to infinity. So
Yeah, and
And
as
that
we said
speaks
in
so well to Brandon's creativity, if you think about it. Like, time travel can sometimes be a bit of a cop out to make your story complex. Brandon can build this incredibly complex world without time travel. It's impressive.
agreed.
and yeah, as we said in episode 2 as well, it just avoids a whole list of problems and disingenuating scenes. Like, if time travel were a thing, and then you read chapter 29, and then in the back of your brain you're just thinking, well, why didn't they just go back in time and beat the nightmare before all this happened, blah blah blah. But when you paint the picture of, we're deliberately not doing this, then chapter 29 has way more weight to it, because that this is the last shot that Nikaro has to save Yumi, and does so. So halfway through this chapter, in chapter 31, Yumi says, "Oh, I've got an idea." and then she doesn't explain herself until like the end of the chapter or something, and Nakaro's just kind of following around for, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes of audio time. Just what's your idea? Come here. What's your idea? I'll show you. Come here. Kind of bothered me. But anyone want to talk about Yumi's great idea?
I I got confused at one point. I thought I'd missed it. I thought she had shared the idea and that I hadn't realized what it was. And no, she was just stringing Painter along. The idea, though, is brilliant. Like, I should have thought of this already as they were trying to get Painter to stack the stones and learn how to do it. There was a much better way for them to do that, and it's what Yumi figures out. She can stack spirit stones. So what she does is she stacks the spirit stones to give Painter a template to follow. All Painter has to do is grab the real stone and match exactly how Yumi stacked it, and then he's golden. He can stack like Yumi. Takes a little bit of practice, I'm sure. It's still kind of tricky, but like that's brilliant. And it works too. They get a spirit pretty quick.
I think it's interesting that we've had this conversation a couple times, but the machine's spirits apparently aren't working great. There's a
Yeah.
villager that they walk past who's having trouble with his little levitating plant machine or something that has been pulled from the machine, and it doesn't work, or it's faulty or whatever. And I read that and I was like, okay, so does the machine work or does the machine not work? I mean, we've gone back and forth on this a couple times now, and I thought we got a definitive answer that yes, the machine does work. It's just slow, but that's fine as if you have like 100 machines. But now it doesn't work. I was a little miffed on this one of why we're going back on it again. No, I don't know.
I tied that to what they go into later in the chapter, which is the realization that the machine keeps a part of the spirit soul for itself when it creates those devices.
Yeah,
I I looked at that as the reason why the devices are a little bit faulty is because the device itself is not using the entire soul to create them. It's stealing a little bit for itself. And so the resulting device you get is a little finicky. So the machine is not faulty, it's intentionally not creating good devices.
or it's just a unfortunate byproduct of. I understand what you're saying. That does this relate at all to like splitting spren in fabrials in conjoined fabrials? That's where my brain went when the like in Rhythm of War when the sibling gets really angry um with Navani. Wow, been a while. When sibling gets really angry with Navani about making fabrials and trapping Spren, I'm sure that has implications, but I'm really having a hard time drawing conclusive thoughts on this. I don't know.
This seemed to be the thing that the spirits don't like.
Okay.
This seems like the crux of it all for me. This is what the spirits are trying to get Yumi to save them from is this machine that summons them, which that's not a problem, but then splits them such that part of their soul goes into the devices, but part of it keeps for itself for unknown purposes, whether it's that's what it needs to like keep itself powered or for other like more nefarious purposes, as if that's not nefarious enough. I am not sure.
Yeah. I don't know. I have a lot of mixed feelings on this machine and what's been revealed to us and what hasn't. Because I'm almost more confused than anything. I've written I'm confused like, I don't know, 3 times in this outline and the next. So that there's some crazy things, but there's also some information that we're like deliberately not being told about the machine. So that it's just odd. I don't know.
Later on in chapter, I think it's 34. So next episode, we're going to talk a little bit more about it. But I am with you. I'm extremely confused by what we see this thing do,
Right.
and I feel like there's more to it.
Yeah.
I think even so, we've read through chapter 37. There's not a lot left in the book necessarily after that, but I think there's going to be something that might help us answer some of these questions because this machine is weird.
The spirits do specifically ask to stop the machine. We're
Yeah.
we're chapter 31, beginning of part 4, and we finally have our mission statement. Stop the machine. It took us, 80% of the book to get to the mission that we are doing.
So I have a question about this machine. Maybe this was answered later and I totally missed it. If so, then go ahead and just tell me that and we'll talk about it later. Um, you're right. We're given this very directly from the spirits that this machine is bad,
Yeah.
very directly. And I assume I'm making assumptions here. I'm assuming that is the Fabrial that's powering this. With my Roshard terms, the Fabrial powering this is capturing Spren, or is it consuming Spren, or do we know how the actual logic of how this is working, how it's functioning, or by Spren I mean spirits, but same thing, I guess? Question mark, whatever you want to call it. Because I assume that's why. Because he's saying, "Please," like the little quote. It's like, "Please, freedom, stop the machine." Right. So it's got to be like capturing and imprisoning, but I don't know. I feel like I'm struggling because I feel like, are these machines just capturing all of the spirits that come out? I thought they used these spirits as they came up. I feel like there's a missing piece in my mind on this, maybe.
And early on, I think I'm missing the same piece that you are as well. I don't know that that was answered for us in these chapters, but very early on in this book, when Yumi first got the call from the spirits that they needed help, she even in that moment, it's like she just looks at or references somehow the devices they're making, and the spirit specifically says, "No, those aren't the problem." I remember that clearly in the beginning. It was no, the spirits did not mind getting turned into devices.
Right.
It was something else. And so I think the something else has to do with this splitting, has
Yeah.
to do with this stealing part of the spirit to do something else with.
Yeah. I don't. I have more to talk about on the machine, but we will save it for next week. Um, chapter 32, though, we go back to design and her noodle shop, and she looks at Yumi's spirit web. There's a couple specific details that she brings up that are very interesting. Did you guys catch these?
I think I at least caught a few. I was a little distracted by just this Fabrial device in itself. Like as soon
Yeah.
as design pulls it out on the desk and says, "All right, Yumi, put your hand on here." It's like, "Whoa, hold on a second. What is this?" She calls it Fabrial. And so I'm like, "Well, what is it doing? Does it just is it just detecting investiture? Is it just letting design see connections?" And it seems like more than that. This seems like an extremely advanced Fabrial device thing.
I feel like some tech revolution, industrial revolution happened on Roshar, and then a bunch of these Fabrials just kind of got smuggled off by the Ghost Bloods or something to these other planets. Because a Fabrial that can manipulate connection, well, or at least observe connection, that seems to imply that it's trying to what's what I'm looking for, utilize the powers of a bondsmith, because we know that bondsmiths can affect connection like
Yeah.
deliberately, and um so and we've seen other fabrials kind of mimic uh other knights radiant and stuff like that. So this
Mhm.
one seems to be a bondsmith connection fabrial, so I'm curious to know if it is from Roshar and what the rules are on it.
Yeah. But I mean, this is way more complicated than like a span read
Right.
where you've got one pen just mirroring the actions of another. This is like, let me gaze into your soul with my magic scanner box thing.
She's got like a VR tablet that she's scanning Yumi with.
MRI.
Yeah.
She's got like an MRI machine in a box under her bar at the noodle shop.
Because why not?
I sure. We get some name drops in this section. So references, not necessarily name drops. Design reads Yumi's spirit web and then just starts spouting Cosmere.
Yes.
She says she starts going crazy about investiture. We get like a little lesson on what investiture is. And then she says things like, wow, you've got so much investiture, more than a returned, almost Elantrian levels. Like, I get one of those references. I don't get the other one of those references.
Yes.
I'm intrigued.
It is. It is. I have to say, it made me kind of excited because I think this is the only time I remember seeing something that is a direct, like, this has got to be a direct Elantris
Mhm.
nod.
Right.
That oh, you resemble an Elantrian, you know. And so I was like, okay, now we need to read Elantris, um, which got me excited. But you're right. This is kind of crazy. I would love to see this device elsewhere in the Cosmere. I want to
Oh,
start checking
yeah.
people out and seeing how strong they are. I guess how invested people are. We could finally
Here, Taravangian,
prove
put your
it.
hand on this for me and
Yeah,
see what happens.
we could finally prove it. Well, never mind. That's sad. I was gonna say we could prove or disprove Trevor's TN theory, but I don't know if we can. I don't know how that works. So, um, anyways, I
I you know what this box would tell us if we took it to Roshar? It would tell us that Shallan is Lightsong.
It's true.
you're right. That's why this box has been hidden from us for so long.
Yep.
So we still don't know about the timeline of this, right? Of this book, where it is in the timeline.
I
I mean, we know on this planet it is like modern day,
right. I
but
I assume it's after Stormlight 5. I think that's a fairly easy assumption to make, simply because design says I've only been alive for a few years, or sorry, she says I've only had eyes for a few years, and even I can see straight through you, Nikaro. That's when Nikaro's being all coy about his feelings for Yumi. Um, and we know that she becomes bonded with what's his face Hoyd at the end of Oathbringer, and then um, Rhythm of War is a year after Oathbringer. Presumably, Stormlight 5 is right after Rhythm of War. That we've got our 10 days timeline and all that fun stuff. So I assume that this is after Stormlight 5.
I I have a theory on exactly this, but it's based on some hints from later chapters.
Mm.
So chalk me up for yet again another theory to bring out next episode.
We've got all the teasers for next week in this episode.
I apologize.
Design mentions that Yumi has had her memory tampered with or altered. What's the word she uses? I don't remember what the word she uses is, but it's
It's like removed or deleted.
yeah, removed maybe. Um She'd use the word delete. She's a numbers girl. Um, so I'm curious what that means, and that there's a lot of implications there on who did that and what and why, and yeah, I don't know what to think there.
I was very confused by that or intrigued by that. And then we kept reading and we got some sort of not answers that make me so much more confused.
Hmm.
So I think we'll have to dissect that in our next episode a little bit. But this caught me off guard. Like deleting people's memories was not on my radar of plot devices we were going to run into on this planet.
Yeah.
I agree. This confused me as well, and I'm not sure what to make of it, because if it's happening to Yumi, then likely this has happened to others, and so it just makes me really curious about how deep this is gonna go. Is all of her planet just kind of like a brainwashed, memory wiped world,
Hmm.
quote world, that's like hidden in a closet somewhere? Like who knows? By who knows, I mean, I know, of course, I just predicted it, but just the ambiguous rhetorical question, who knows?
Design mentions that she's got connections to the other Yokihijo, even though Yumi says she's never met them or only met one of them or something like that. And she says, "Oh, they're that direction somewhere." And so then Yumi just starts running that direction. They get to the shroud, and Yumi starts stacking, and the shroud responds to the stacking, which makes me think even more that this is anti-investiture as opposed to investiture, because it specifically repels the shroud and it begins to like churn and bubble, or is what it says, and then it peels back and peels back until it reveals a frozen woman dressed as a Yokihijo with her hand outstretched like mid scream. And we don't get to like brew on that at all, because then it closes right back up. We didn't get to know, is this woman alive? Is this woman like breathing? Is we just get a very brief description. Shroud closes back up, and then they are like, "What was that?" And then the chapter ends. So I don't. I apologize on the chapter split here that we have to talk about this and not the future chapters here, but I don't know. What do you guys think?
It is a bit funny that we don't, that it's split here. And I guess that's kind of a byproduct of how we're doing this, or just, inevitable at some point. But I mean, as far as what's going on here, it is enough to still make you think, make you ask a lot of questions, and things like that. Since we are nearing the end of the book, it's one of those where you have, at least you hope to have, a little more faith that these questions will be answered soon.
I think I'm still stuck on the whole, why do the stacks of rocks even react with investiture at all?
Yeah.
We were so sure with our Rosharian knowledge that it had nothing to do with the rocks, and it was the art of creation that drew our bread and spirit things. It seems pretty clear by now that that's not true. That it truly is stacked rocks and not artwork or not paint or other forms of art, just rocks stacked or stuff stacked that draws spirits and repels the shroud. Like why?
I
Why did virtuosity care so much about stacking stuff?
I think no, I think that's exactly it. I think it might be a Virtuosity personal preference.
She just like stacks.
Yeah, I think she like doesn't like rock music and likes rock stacks and doesn't care for paintings and really enjoys, claymation art. Like if you've got your preferences, and so when Virtuosity splinters herself, some art is going to be more effective against the investiture than others. I think it might just be that simple.
That I'm really glad you mentioned that, Trevor. So I've never considered the like normal person version of like just interests,
Right.
preferences,
Right.
taste. Like, yeah, I don't like hip hop music. I like 1930s jazz music. Like it just I don't know, like stuff like that, and how something like random like stacked rocks would be like. It's like bird watching, like you bring an aviary here and maybe the whole world goes crazy,
Right.
because they loved bird watching. I don't know, like that's such a hilarious
And
topic.
maybe like there's some secret art form that they haven't discovered yet that Virtuosity is really into, like short form poetry. What if you just started writing poems next to the shroud and all of a sudden that was really effective,
And we did get those hints in the very beginning about like the Fibonacci sequence
Mm.
and the golden rule of beauty and all of that, how you can take beauty in some senses and boil it down to an equation. And I almost wonder if that is what's at play here, is somehow Virtuosity is not just into art, they're into art plus the science of it all as well. Maybe. I don't know. It
Cymatics.
still doesn't quite fully connect for me. Yeah, or yeah, things like that where it's like the combination of physics and beauty and creation, not just beauty itself, but the full picture of it's beautiful because it challenges the laws of physics, but yet aligns with them.
Wonder if magnets, Virtuosity would be interested in magnets.
Maybe. And then
I think
the
that
Yokihijo.
sorry to cut you off, Elliot. I just have when you mentioned magnets, Trevor, I just had the perfect like real world thing that we have that Virtuosity would just love. Those like I think they were called like I don't know. I've seen them called all sorts of different things. Like called like rattlesnake eggs or something. They were like little metal rock magnets. Have y'all seen these?
Oh, and
Little
they like
metal like
make
rock magnets. You throw them together and they go like zzz, or whatever. They like roll around and
Yes.
yes.
magnetize and stuff. Anyways, just thinking about those, just all those magnetic rock things. I think that's the sweet spot right there. Virtuosity, that was definitely the favorite childhood toy there.
Yeah.
Those magnetic rocks. Anyways, sorry, that was unimportant. But
If next time I'm getting Virtuosity a party favor, I'll make sure I pick up some of those magnet
yes,
toys.
perfect.
Virtuosity probably like Rubik's cubes too.
Maybe.
Maybe
Probably.
I don't know. That's a stretch.
Stacked
Maybe
Rubik's
if there's like
cubes on other Rubik's cubes. There
Those
you
people
go.
who make the
with like
art out of Rubik's
Yep,
cubes. Have you
there you
seen
go.
that?
Yep.
Yeah,
yeah, there you go.
This is a great tangent we're on, by the way. I love this.
it is fantastic. This is one of my favorites. I have to admit.
The Yokihijo though, that comes out of the shroud or gets revealed by the shroud, I don't know how to take that. That's one of those things where it's like I don't even know what to think about what that means.
Yeah.
Is it like there was a person there at one time and they got like Mount Vesuvius style encased in the shroud and it's just like a figure there? Or is it there's an actual being, like one of the Yokihijos actually is like actively trying to get to Yumi and is reaching out of the shroud, or is it because Yumi's there and because Yumi is wanting to try to connect to a Yokihijo, that just the being, the nightmare, if you will, takes the shape of what Yumi is trying to perceive in
Yeah.
that moment? That almost seems like the most logical explanation to me, because so much of this has been about perception and what you what you expect something to look like, or what you expect to be able to interact with. If if Yumi is expecting to make contact with a Yokihijo because she's chasing this connection line that design has showed her. By the way, design comes like shuffling out of her noodle shop down to the edge of the shroud to watch all this, which I thought was random. But yeah, I'm not quite sure what to do with this.
I'm probably, and I think it's deliberate that we don't get a super long explanation of, is this an actual person, or is this just a vision, a figment, or whatever. I'm also leaning towards the shroud is showing Yumi what she wants to see. I don't think there's an actual person there. Or maybe there is. And Elliot, back to the first thing you said of virtuosity splinters herself, shadows falling from the sky, back that we heard whatever in chapter 7, or no, it was earlier than that, chapter 1 or so. Whenever the catastrophic event happened, some people just got consumed by the shroud and never made it out. Maybe that is the case. But then, that was 1700 years ago. Then you are pointing more towards time travel, which we do bring up here, but we also shut it down as well. So I don't know.
Well, we'll get into this more next episode. Time travel is not happening, but the perception or illusion of it could be.
True. Okay.
We could be creating the illusion of a time many years ago, even though we're not physically actually there.
Anything else for this week, gentlemen?
I think I'm confused enough. We better get into the next chapters.
Yes.
I could not have said it better myself.
Let us draw the veil back and actually get to talk about what we are deliberately not talking about this week, and reconvene next week. Thanks for joining me, Paul and Elliot.
See you in a bit.
Peace.